Hi, welcome back guys. This is your Sensei, back with another fanfiction. This is the third part of What If Deku Fought for Harem. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. This is nice. I like this. Can I have it? Jin. Put it down. Yes, mama. Ma. I have questions. Have you failed me again, Cinder? I have my queen. I beg your forgiveness. Salem knew her seer lacked the ability to convey proper emotions as most humans could not sow the murky image within. Her minion quivered with emotion. Cinder kept her head down as she knelt, hiding her scars in the shadows. She couldn't conceal her true feelings, even through the misty facade. Her shoulders trembled, though in rage or fear, she knew not. It didn't matter. Her failure was clear. First she had failed to acquire Fall. Now winter had slipped through her grasp. Unacceptable. Perhaps she needed a reminder of her place. Their task had been a simple one with Ashbin's Eye elsewhere and Ironwood in Vale. His kingdom was vulnerable. Tyrion had found the identity of the Spring Maiden, and so had moved to take her. Hazel was sent to reinforce him. Meanwhile, both Watts and Cinder had struck at winter in her isolated sanctum deep within Addis. Ashbin was many things, but he couldn't be in two places at once. It was a two-pronged assault, guaranteed to succeed. Fate had other plans. The Winter Maiden was undoubtedly dead now. There could no longer be any doubt of that. Cinder had slain that old crone through and through. But the power hadn't gone to her. In her final moments, the woman proved herself full of spite. Rather than roll over and die like a good senile hag, she'd fought back. What followed as described by Cinder was an ugly and protracted fight that finally ended with Freya's death. Even then her power had gone to another and utter unknown. It would take months if not years to ferret out her identity. No matter. Setbacks were setbacks. She had all the time in the world. I want Arthur in Vale. She said, apropos of nothing. I have need of him. Shall I return as well? Not yet. Salem rebuked her. You will atone for your failure in another way. She gave Cinder her instructions, and watched a smile stretch across her face. Such a shame about her eye. News traveled quickly, and sometime later Salem discovered they'd lost on the other front as well. Lionheart's defeat was to be expected. The death of Hazel was an irritant to be sure, but Tyrion? Oh, sweet, sweet Tyrion. He'd done just as she told him. By all accounts, they'd taken him to Vale for questioning. You couldn't interrogate a dead man. On that front, all was proceeding according to plan. And the body of Hazel might yet prove useful after all. She had an experiment in mind. He would make a useful host. Plans within plans within plans. When one failed, another would take its place. Such was her way. And what of you? She looked away from the now silent seer. What do you think of this? Someone stirred in the shadows. They've overreached themselves. A pale brow quirked. Have they now? They have. She thought she caught the flash of a scowl in the dim light, but the hooded cloak made it difficult to discern, even with her keen vision. Now you know the identity of both Spring and Fall, which means the lamp you spoke of is likely in their possession. They'll use it, of course. They may even come for you. A scoffing sound in the dark. Foolish, perhaps, but I've dealt with fools before. How droll. Salem smiled despite herself. It was not a pleasant smile. Two maidens are no threat to me. If they strike, I'll crush them. Still, they persisted. A fool he might be, but he's a powerful fool. You'd be wise not to underestimate him. So you say, your advice has proven invaluable. I live to serve. The hooded figure bowed in response to her words, bending low and deep at the waist. Salem smiled at her newest acquisition. Welcome to the fold. The fools knew not what awaited them. For only the second time in her life, Jin was taken by surprise. A most pleasant feeling. She wondered when she would experience it again. This was new. This was strange. This was unexpected, in the most wonderful of ways. Unlimited knowledge at his fingertips, and yet in lieu of that, Naruto Uzumaki had not made a selfish request. Instead, he'd asked how to free her. An answer was given and the deed was done. She couldn't help but feel that the gods held a hand in that. Was this their design? Was she meant to be free from her lamp? Was she meant to help him? To guide him? Had they summoned this young hero here to Remnant? Naruto had spoken little of his ill-fated landing, but Amber had been eager to provide details of her own. He'd arrived in a thunderclap and saved her. From that single ripple, the world changed. She asked herself again, was she meant to be free? Jin did not know, and she reveled in her lack of knowledge. Truly, it was a miracle she was here at all, living this moment, untethered by the wicked whims of fate. Idly she raised a pale hand and gazed upon it, marveling at its beauty. She curled her fingers into a fist and felt her palm tighten. She could taste, she could touch, she could smell as well. 3 senses that she'd not held prior to her release. The gods had granted her sight and hearing before. Nothing more. Now all her senses were open to her. And it was glorious. By strength of will with wicked cleverness, Naruto had set her free and given her a physical form in a single masterful stroke. Thanks to him, she could once more interact with the world at her leisure. She subsisted off his chakra now. Like a what had he called it? A shadow clone? It made her feel like a parasite at first, but he'd insisted she was anything but. Speaking of feeling absolutely reckless, Taeyong flung his arms up. What were you thinking? Not like we had any choice, Crow countered. Just calm down. Deep blue eyes turned away from the bickering boys. She tugged at Amber's sleeve. Why are they arguing? The fall maiden rolled her eyes. Because they're idiots. They'll calm down in a minute. A curious pang of fear struck her. They're not going to tell him who I am, are they? Not a chance. A hand tousled her hair, stroking her scalp in slow circles. Jin rather liked the sensation and leaned into it. Your secret is safe with us. Jin dared a tentative smile. This is nice. I like this. Amber laughed and took her hand away. I didn't say stop, Mama. Amber squeaked. Ma. As ever, it was fun to tease her. Another question. Why did humans fight with one another? Curious. Salem and the Grim were the true enemy. One would think that many would see that. Naruto did. He wasn't willing to burn away his soul to win the day. He'd proven that much already and already begun to gather allies of his own. Could an alliance be formed against Salem? Could she be stopped? Sealed even? Jin wasn't sure. Immortality was a tricky thing. The gods had simply stated that Salem could not die. They never said she couldn't be stopped. As if sensing that very thought, the blonde caught her eye over Tai's shoulder and flashed her a quick wink. What would happen when he ran out of chakra? Would she cease to exist? Or would she revert to her former form and lose access to this one? The question should have rankled her. It didn't. She didn't have to answer it, for she was no longer bound by the obligations of the lamp. She could choose. She rather liked that. She was lesser in this body perhaps, but she could abandon it at a moment's notice and revert to her true form at any time. Doing so would allow her to regain the knowledge she was so cursed with. No doubt there were limits and restrictions she didn't yet know of, but that was fine. You see, Jin didn't want to change back if only because she wasn't. Sure she could. Fear of not being able to return to this form. That final question could go to the void for all she cared. It was hers to hold for him in sacred trust. For him and him alone. In this body she knew so very little after all. Perhaps that was why she'd been forced into the guise of a child. It was chosen for her, ordained by some higher power she didn't understand. She loved it. Her new form made many empathize with her. It also made her curious. And so she began to question as a child would. This new life was hers, blast it, and she was determined to make the most of it while she could. When the argument began to abate, she settled in with a smile. This was new too after all. And that's what happened. There's no changing it. Taeyong Xiaolong would have murdered a man for a stiff drink right about now. Not a simple cup of hot cider or hot coffee. Oh no, something good and strong was required her. Something with a kick. Something to wash away the bitter taste currently filling his mouth. Something that would knock him right out, wipe tonight away with the tale he'd just been told and leave him none the wiser for it. Alas, all he had on hand was Crow's empty hip flask, filched from the man himself. He drank it dry an hour ago. It wasn't enough. Not nearly enough. He wasn't even tipsy. He toppled back into a chair with a forlorn sigh. Quite the tale, he said instead, staring doggedly at the ceiling. Better there than her. But why are you here? We had to leave Mistral in a hurry and I was low on aura. A soft, familiar voice plucked at his heartstrings. You weren't my first choice. So it was a happy accident, then. Anger reared its ugly head when she didn't correct him. Him and her. You could have made a portal to Yang. She misses you. Silence reigned supreme. Taeyong sighed and buried his face in his hands. Stubborn as ever, I see for all his faults and flaws, Taeyong Xiaolong was a patient and tolerant man. He was good, humble, kind even in a miserable world that had been terribly unkind to him and his. He'd lost 2 wives to misfortune and disaster, raised their daughters alone and emerged a better man for it. But here? Yeah, alcohol was needed. Copious amounts of the stuff. Bad enough that Raven had come crashing into his living room via portal. Bad enough that she'd made a mess and ruined the couch. Bad enough that they'd made a terrible ruckus fit to wake the dead. For his ex-wife had not come home alone. She'd brought friends. Many friends. Some of them, Tai recognized. Others he didn't. There was Crow, of course, fresh from a fight, looking worn and bedraggled as he leaned against a nearby wall. There was an ugly bruise under his right eye. His gaze kept flitting between the two of them, and he'd yet to take a hand from Harbinger's hilt. Did he really think they were that immature? That they'd come to blows over this? Look, we'll be out of your hair come morning. His words emerged in a low rasp. We just need to lay low and recharge for a bit. Tai quirked a brow. His gaze shifted to their leader. And what do you have to say about this? Blue eyes rose to meet his. He knew the blonde with the headband if only in passing. He'd seen him from a distance in the streets of Vale, though it felt like an eternity ago now. Naruto was his name. He seemed a decent enough sort, albeit a bit stressed. Judging by the dark bags under his eyes, he'd not slept well for quite some time. Still, he'd conducted himself well with introductions, apologized for the mess, and done his best to tidy up after the fact. For that, he got a pass. Poor kid looked like he needed a drink too. Well, despite his exhaustion, the whiskered warrior granted him a careworn smile. I don't know how you put up with Raven. She's a handful. A rusty laugh burst from his lips. She's an acquired taste. Said Raven squawked. Hey, Crow guffawed. Naruto's companion giggled softly even as Tai turned his gaze on her. That girl sitting beside him on the couch, with her sun-kissed skin and warm golden eyes, what was her name again? He grasped for it in the chaos, trying to remember. Blast it. She'd told him outright only a few minutes ago, but he'd been understandably distracted at the time. It started with an A, but he couldn't recall for the life of him. Anna? Amanda? Amber? Aha, that was it. Us had mentioned her once in passing when her predecessor passed away. So this was Cassandra's successor, then? He hoped she fared better than that poor girl. The last fall maiden hadn't lived a charmed life. Likewise, the little blue girl currently sat in Amber's lap was another anomaly to be sure, but Taeyong had seen stranger things back in his heyday. Even now, she gazed about his living room with naked curiosity, pointing babbling questions all the while. Those two did well to put up with her. What had they called her? Jin? Yes. That was the name. It sounded strangely familiar. Probably nothing. She looked like little more than a curious child. Almost adorable, really. Maybe she was a shark fauness of some kind. Had they adopted her? From there, things became decidedly unpleasant. He didn't recognize the surly girl sat on Naruto's left, but she certainly knew him. Vernal, was it? She had the look of someone from Raven's tribe. She flinched and looked away under his keen gaze, and not at all amused by her coltish behavior, Taeyong changed targets. Once more his gaze roved across the room. Once more, it fell upon Leonardo Lionheart and Tyrion Kalos, each under heavy guard by a pair of clones and strapped down in such a way that neither man could possibly hope to escape their shackles. In truth, it was difficult to recognize them, for their faces were a bruised, twisted mess. Naruto and Amber's satisfied expression said it all. Tai knew there was another story to be had there, but he hadn't been able to coax it out of them yet. He wasn't sure he wanted to. Lionheart was a traitor, one who sent huntsmen and huntresses to their deaths for years. The knowledge rankled more than it should, but with it came relief. There had been a time, a very brief time after Summer's death, when he'd considered leaving Vale altogether. Just putting it all behind him and taking ship to Mistral. Leave all the memories behind, that sort of thing. It seemed like a good idea at the time. Crow talked him out of it. He'd been right to stay in Vale. Leonardo would have found a way to get rid of him to be sure Yang and Ruby wouldn't have been far behind. A small shudder stole over him and he gripped his shoulders until he felt something creak. By some miracle, both girls were still fast asleep upstairs. Thank the gods for small miracles. His eldest would never forgive him if she learned about this. Thankfully, Yang was a heavy sleeper. Another bullet dodged there. But Ruby, she was a light sleeper. He must keep calm. He mustn't shout. If she woke up, she'd dash downstairs. She wouldn't keep quiet about this. She would ask questions he wouldn't be able to answer. Questions that would surely wake Yang and then all hell would break loose. Raven was a complicated woman. Her daughter wasn't. Yang would absolutely combust if she saw her mother now. Now at last he came to the Goliath in the room. Taeyong knew he couldn't avoid that particular landmine any longer. He had to look her in the eye even if he didn't want to. With a wrench, he forced himself to look at Yang's mother. Fortunately, she was distracted by something Naruto had said and thus missed his lingering eye. All told, Raven looked good. Really good, better than he remembered. Almost glowing even. Brimming with vitality and life, she looked content, if somewhat ruffled by Naruto's verbal jabs. It was such a rare expression for her that it took him aback. An ugly thought struck him and repulsed by such a horrid notion, he shoved it away. No. He was jumping to conclusions. And were her eyes glowing? Surely he imagined that. He must have. That implied something even more unpleasant. What do you want, Raven? He regretted the words the moment he said them, if only because her gaze snapped to him. Red eyes met blue. The world held its breath. From you? Long lashes fluttered in a slow blink. Nothing. I have no right to be here. And I wouldn't be, she shot a baleful glower at Naruto, if someone hadn't forced my hand. No idea what you're talking about. The younger blonde looked away and feigned ignorance as he showed Jin a storybook book he'd filched from the cupboard. Here, have a look at this. Sweetheart Tai wasn't sure if he wanted to thank the youth or smack him upside the head. Maybe a bit of both. He clearly had a vested interest in reuniting the two of them. It wasn't that simple. It never would be. Maybe if Raven got down on her knees and apologized, he might think better of her. Perhaps, were she to throw herself at Yang's feet and beg forgiveness, things could change between the two of them. But she would never do such a thing. She was too stubborn. Too proud by half. Besides, it was too late. 15 years too late. It was all Raven's fault, anyway. Look, just make a portal to Ashbin or something. His temper slipped its leash and he masterfully reeled it back in before he could say something he would regret. He works late on weekends, or so I've been told. His gaze swept the room, taking in Crow and the rest. Look, Crow, you're welcome to stay the night if you want, but I'm afraid I'll have to ask the rest of you to leave. I don't want Yang asking questions. Crow caught on. Sit. Forgot about the runts. Vernal muttered a curse. Naruto silenced her with an elbow. Fits? Amber perked up. Realization dawned behind her hazel eyes. Well, that's awkward. Jin smiled softly in a knowing way that bellied her years. Taeyong didn't much like it. For the first time since he'd met the child, he found himself forced to avert his gaze. Something strange about that one. He could not quite put his finger on it, but there was something there. Naruto, bless his little heart, still tried to salvage the situation. Can't Raven at least see her? Tai rooted him with a glance. With all due respect, son, this doesn't involve you. The young warrior tilted his head and squinted at him like a wary fox. I'm feeling pretty DMN involved given that your ex-wife kidnapped me and started this sitso. That stirred her enough to speak. Taeyang listened. Raven stood and seemed to wrestle with herself for a moment. Her conscience pricked at her, prodding her to speak. You can't trust Ashbin. He's been keeping secrets. This again? No, he slashed a hand through the air, silencing her before she could pick up steam. I don't want to hear your excuses. Just stop talking. This was a mistake. He didn't want to hear her voice. He didn't even want to look at her. It brought back too many painful memories. Jin and Amber had fallen silent. Vernal and Crow didn't dare speak. And Raven cowered. Incensed by his refusal, the woman he'd once loved turned her head and spat at his feet. You're too afraid to hear the truth. And what truth is that? The blonde brawler stepped forth to meet her. By all means enlighten me gladly, she pushed back with a growl and slammed her forehead against his. Salem is Raven. Naruto spoke curtly before she could finish. Don't tell him. She rounded on him with a snarl. Why not? You'll break him. Do you want that? Incredibly, she obeyed. Grinding her teeth, she spun away and flounced across the room. Taeyong didn't miss the way her gaze lingered on the whiskered warrior as she did. Raven never deferred to anyone. Ever. Not even him during happier times. Everything was always a challenge with her. So why would Shio? He looked at Naruto, noticing something he hadn't before. An ugly epiphany dawned and drew a startled blink from him. She always had a thing for blonde hair and blue-eyed boys. So she'd gone for a younger model. Oddly enough, that didn't make him as angry as it. It stung a little to be sure, but this was a wound that had long since scarred over. Summer saw to that. No, something else roused his anger. She hadn't asked about Yang. Not once. What manner of mother was she? Don't you care about your daughter at all? To her credit, Raven flinched. Just a little. Yang's not my daughter. A BLD red iris peered over her shoulder. You and Summer raised that girl better than I ever could. She shook her head. I'm not her mother. I'm just a stranger. Her hand closed on the door handle and swung it open. It's time I left. Taeyong twitched. Naruto burst to his feet. Raven, what the hell? Now what? She snarled at her lover. I'm being honest, for crying out loud, she's better off without. Raven's head was still turned to regard him. She never saw Tai's fist coming. But she certainly felt it. Clenched knuckles barreled into the side of her face with an almighty crack, and the spring maiden went down without a sound, nose squirting Her head struck the table and aura crackled angrily as she tumbled over it. Tai gave chase, refusing to give her a chance to recover. Why should he? Yang was the only gift Raven had ever given him. The thought was hot tar in his veins, angry and bubbling. Blinding. She blinked up at him from the floor, terribly startled, and for a moment he felt guilt. He realized it now. This was what hate felt like. His arms swung down at her as she fell, catching her chin. Raven's head snapped back, but only for a moment. A pale hand snared his wrist, stopping the next strike cold. In a blind fury he lashed out with the other, only to find it casually slapped away. He caught a smile on her face, and it burned. That was all she cared about. Strength. Even after all these years, she hadn't changed. Not bad all. You're still strong. Those were some good hits. Narrow red eyes regarded him as she reached up to thumb a thin line of red from her lips. I deserved all that and more. However, sinister scarlet orbs flashed, burning with baleful flames. The sight of them doused his anger. Don't mistake my silence for acceptance. Taeyong jerked back as the wind began to pick up. Raven reined it in a moment later, her unspoken threat made all too clear. Those were the eyes of a maiden. He'd seen them before. They didn't belong to fall. Amber was sitting only a few paces away, her face pensive with stress and shame. Which Mianto, dear? Raven had done it, hadn't she? She hadn't just crossed that line, she'd leaped over it. What have you done? What was necessary? Raven dropped his arm and stepped back, reaching for her sword. We're done here. Omen tore itself free of its sheath in a bloody flourish. A heartbeat later, it ripped through the air, creating a crimson portal. She hustled Vernal through it and Crow followed with a weary sigh. The rest were quick to do the same. In short order, they were alone again. Her gaze sought his one last time, and she grappled with something. In the end, she thought better of it. Naruto stepped up and drove an elbow into her ribs. She hissed and spat at him, but the blonde wasn't having it. Live well, time. May we meet again. Together. Stepped through and closed it behind her. Taeyong staggered back to the couch, shoulders slumped in defeat. He never saw Ruby and Yang watching from the stairs until it was too late. Much too late. When the portal opened in his office, Ashbin nay, Ozma was ready for them. With his cane planted before him, he stood ready, both hands braced upon its worn hilt. It was as much for balance as an anxiety. He did not blink as that crimson tether snarled into existence, nor did he deign to speak as the conquering heroes stepped through it. He was an immutable pillar. Unflinching. Immovable. He must provide a strong front for what was to come, the better by which to reassure those before him. He had to be strong, even when it felt like his hopes might shatter at any given moment. He would not fail here. He would not falter. I suppose you have questions. His words trailed off into gibberish when Raven Branwen emerged from the portal. Crow was only half a step behind. His expression looked promising. A flicker of surprise flashed across Ashbin's weathered visage, and he dared to hope in against hope. Had they done it? Would she be returning for good? That was Amber with them to be sure, and she seemed quite all right. Had they come to an agreement? Red eyes met gray. Not a word. It's good to see you. Leonardo Lionheart and Tyrion Kalos sailed through the portal, bound and gagged like a pair of holiday hogs. Ashbin tried not to balk. He really truly did. But how could he not? In all fairness, he recovered quickly, but by then it was already too late. When Naruto emerged with Jin riding atop his shoulders, his jaw clicked open. No, that just wasn't possible, wasn't it? Ashbin looked left. Ashbin looked right. Ashbin sighed in defeat. I have several questions. The blonde's smile threatened to split his face. What a coincidence, so dewy it would prove to be a long evening. That's the truth then? Ashbin's head sank into his hands. Naruto frowned down at him. No more secrets? None. The headmaster's shoulders bowed under the weight of those words. At least, none that I know of. All told, the former knight looked tired. As if the last of his strength were wrung from him with the truth. And in a sense, it was. He had been powerful once, before giving up most of that power to what were now the maidens. In his prime, with his full strength at his disposal, he would have been a formidable foe for someone like Salem. To say nothing of the cane he carried with him. In the end, he'd given up that secret too. His gaze flicked to it now, regarding the man's cane with wary regard. Such a little thing. Yet it held centuries of energy, painstakingly stored away in what seemed little more than a harmless walking stick. Now he knew better. Ashbin's lives were many. In each life he'd given a bit of his life force to that cane. He swore it was a last resort, something he would only ever be used in an emergency. The revelation didn't make Naruto any less wary. If all of that energy were unleashed at one seat, would be the remnant equivalent of a tailed beast bomb. Best keep an eye on that weapon of his. Kurama muttered crossly. That thing's a nuke waiting to go off. He frowned despite himself. Would it kill us? Difficult to say. We might be able to tank it. I wouldn't say the same for Amber or Raven. Didn't know you cared about the Demon Beachy Bird. You going soft on me? Hardly. She's a useful ally. Her portals are convenient. Sir. Naruto pinched the brow of his nose and willed himself to focus on the task at hand. It was difficult not to let Ashbin's miserable tale register on an emotional level. Hearing it from the man's mouth painted the memory in vivid relief. Worse, he'd lived it. Jin had crammed the man's memories in their very skulls, shown them all that he had endured and more. They'd seen what he suffered, what Salem suffered. A part of him empathized with their plight. If Amber died suddenly, he wasn't sure what he'd do. He tried to harden his heart against that thought, but it proved impossible. Ashbin Asma wasn't a bad person per se. He was simply lost. One man fighting an endless war, with no escape in sight. A solitary soul bailing water out of a sinking ship, desperately trying to stay afloat long enough for some semblance of rescue. But it never came. And so he struggled to keep that ship afloat. Alone. Until Salem or someone managed to kill him, and so the CYCL continued. At least some good had come of all this. Jin was safe with them. While her new physical body remained here, her lamp was sealed away in a scroll whose location was only known to him and him alone. And as of tonight, Salem had been denied 3 powerful pawns. Hazel was dead. Whatever that thing did with his corpse wouldn't change anything. Tyrion and Lionheart were stewing in separate cells, placed under heavy guard. Ironwood and Glinda were even now putting the screws to them. They'd not escape under their watch. Just as well that he didn't want them privy to this discussion. Unfortunately, that left him, Amber, Raven, Crow, and the kids alone with Ashbin. Please, forgive me. The immortal's head bowed further, touching his desk in genuine contrition. You must understand. It was never my intent to deceive you. Though he did not raise his gaze, his voice rolled over their ragtag little group, alarming each of them in turn. Any of you. Secrets are painful things. I was wrong to hide them. Perhaps he was. Perhaps he wasn't. Having heard it twice now, Naruto couldn't bring himself to feel the same ire as before. His revelations lined up with Jin's truth quite nicely, almost word for word. There were no earth-shattering truths here. Jin had already softened the blow. Ashbin merely confirmed their theories. I can't exactly forgive you, Naruto pursed his lips, but I understand why you did it. Trust is a risk. His gaze swept to Amber and Raven. When you trust someone, you open yourself to the possibility of betrayal. But you can't live your life without trusting someone. And I hope it's a risk you can take on me again. To his credit, Ashbin took the words well. I will do my best to be worthy of it. Stop bowing your head, damn it. You're making me feel bad. Reluctantly, the headmaster obeyed. What would you have me say? I've given up trying to kill her. I cannot. Salem can be fought. She can be beaten. But so many fail to see that. He winced, no doubt at some painful memory. They hear the word immortal and fear consumes them. A sour look flitted across his face. Just as it did Leonardo, it seems. But he was not the first to betray me. In truth, I suspect he will not be the last. Straightening at last, he looked upon each of them in turn. For that matter, you're certainly not the first to suggest we take the fight to her. I won't be the last. Naruto looked to each of his allies in turn. Crow balked. You want to fight her? Immortal doesn't mean invincible. Naruto crossed both arms before his tattered jacket. Or infallible. And not right away. I'd need to make preparations. But yeah, I've fought worse. That's right. Amber found her voice first and glided to his side. We can fight her. She laid her head on his shoulder, looping an arm around his waist. And now we have you. Thanks for the vote of confidence. Naruto groused, but the words lacked rancor. Sure, go ahead. Pin all your hopes on me. No pressure. Raven chuckled. It was a low, throaty sound. You brought this upon yourself. Take responsibility. I don't want to hear that from you, sorry. He sought help in Amber's gaze and found only wry amusement there. Gotta side with her on this one. Vernal shrugged weakly, an ember of hope in her eyes. If anyone can do it, it's you, teacher. Ek his heart quite. Jin hummed her agreement, and for a moment, her facade slipped. I'm already bound to you. May as well see this through. Naruto blinked. Well, that's surprisingly mature of you, but no more questions unless they're absolutely necessary. She crossed both arms beneath her pale shirt and sulked like the little girl she now resembled. I wish to remain as I am. A brief look of panic flashed across her azure eyes. I've no longing to become an all-knowing genie ever again. Naruto unbent enough to pat her head. You won't have to. I promise. Fair enough. Ashbin granted with a wave of his wave. So long as you remain as you are now, the relic of knowledge is useless. Salem doesn't know that, of course. She'll still come for you. Naruto didn't miss the hint of parental concern in his. Made sense. Ashbin had been a father once upon a time, and as she was now, Jin was very much a child. Are you sure you wish to remain as you are? Yes, I do. And I anticipated such. Jin granted him a feral smile. Perhaps it's time I pay a visit to my brother, Ambrosius. He may have some ideas when it comes to surprising Salem. Naruto quirked a brow. Sounds promising. Ashbin's smile mirrored hers. I'll be sure to bring James in on that. However, I simply must ask, how do you intend to deal with Salem? Don't look at me. Raven turned her head aside and spat her hands. If I had it my way, I wouldn't even be here. Ever the mediator, Ashbin didn't rise to the bait. Nevertheless, we are glad to have you among us once more. Just know. She silenced him with a growl. I'm here for him. Much to Naruto's chagrin, she stabbed a finger at him. He defeated me in battle. He proved himself worthy of trust from the first. Not you. All eyes fell to Naruto once more. Truth be told, the blonde balked beneath their attention. He didn't much like the idea of everyone looking to him for answers, but he couldn't blame them for it, either. He'd fought those who couldn't die before. 3 prominent names came to mind. Orochimaru, Kabi, even Kagaya there at the end. He'd heard tell of even more. Shikamaru had dealt with Haiden in a similar fashion. Sasori was another extreme example. Each and every one of them had been done away with in one fashion or another. Who wasn't to say Salem wasn't more of the same? I didn't lie back in the vault, He began slowly, choosing his words with delicate care. I've fought immortals before. There's always a loophole. His gaze cut to Ashbin. Jin showed us a fair bit, including the exact words the god used when they cursed her. The knight perked up. Truly? What did they say? I think it went something like this. Naruto's brow furrowed as he struggled to sift through the memories Jin had moved into his head. You must learn the importance of life and death. Only then may you rest. An interesting choice of words. Ashbin leaned back in his chair. That implies she needs to accept the meaning of both. Raven scoffed. Easier said than done. We can work with that. Kurama found his voice at last. Kaguya couldn't die either. We still sealed her. True, they had, albeit with a great deal of help. Kaguya had been a god. Compared to someone like her, Salem was undoubtedly lesser. That didn't make her any less dangerous. She had an army waiting in the wings, too, and unlike Kaguya's, she could simply recreate whatever Grimm she lost in battle. They'd have to cut through the lot of them to reach her. Anyone who went with him would be risking their life. Stealth might well be an option for him, assuming he tried to slip in alone, but he wasn't the most subtle person. No, best save the suicidal charge as a last option. Naruto's mind sprang into action. Have you tried trapping Salem? Many times. Ashbin's fingers drummed against the desk. She always escaped one way or another. If not under her own power, then with Grimm. Have you fought her? The sage nodded. She simply didn't bother to dodge most of my spells. Ever thought of burying her? Crow offered suddenly. Burying her deep? Like Earth's core deep? Ashbin's jaw clicked open. Naruto felt the beginnings of a frown pluck at his whiskered cheeks. What? He'd never thought of that? It seemed rather obvious to him. Shikamaru had blasted Haiden apart, buried him in a pit, then filled it with rubble for good measure. Could the same not be done with Salem? Hack her apart, take the pieces and bury them across Remnant. They'd have to hide them deep indeed, and that was assuming there weren't an subterranean Grimm on Remnant. If her minions could dig her out, then any burial would be pointless. Why not try the reverse? Your technology is more advanced than my world. He spoke slowly, his own assessment. Can you shoot her into space? Then that's it. Amber lit up. We could blast her into the sun or even further. Wait. Vernal raised a hand. Dust doesn't last past Remnant's atmosphere. Everyone knows that. We wouldn't be able to get her up there. So? A blonde brow quirked. I ain't talking about dust. Chakra could do it. Getting up there wouldn't be too hard. What came after might well be. Salem would fight him every step of the way, however. And unlike her, death was a very real possibility for him. He'd have to bind her beforehand. If that failed, he'd have to use his arms. She would struggle all the while, and unlike Ashbin, she still had her magic. Could her magic kill him? Hers was different than the kind Amber and Raven wielded. Was he weak against that kind of corruption? More questions than answers there. I'm not letting you put yourself at risk like that. Kurama vetoed it immediately. Find a better plan. Such an overprotective for the love of come on people. Vernal startled them all with a shout of her own. Does Salem sleep anymore? Does she need to? When Ashbin shrugged helplessly, she flung up her arms. Drag her, then she can't give commands if she isn't conscious. Raven tilted her head. I'd not considered that. Well done. Vernal flushed and tucked her chin into her to see. Well, yeah, even I have good ideas sometimes. Ahem. Jin coughed once, drawing all eyes to her. Forgive me if this sounds droll, but might I throw my hat into the ring? By all means, go ahead. Naruto gestured, giving her the floor. By all means. The more ideas, the merrier. His nose wrinkled. Is someone writing all this down? Amber whipped out a notepad and pen from one of the many pouches on her personage. On it, could we not throw her into a vault and trap her within? Jin temporized, raising one finger. Each vault is a pocket dimension of sorts, created by old magic. A swirl of blue smoke swept from the raised digit and swept around them, illustrating Mistral's own vault with its now closed door. Neither her Grimm nor her minions would be able to breach them once the doors are sealed. Ashbin shook his head anew. We need those for the relics. She could use destruction to blast her way out. To say nothing of choice or creation. But not knowledge. Raven warmed to the idea. Mistral's vault is empty now, thanks to us. She raised a hand of her own. I could open it again and close it just as easily. You'd have to draw her to Mistral, then. Crow knocked his flask back with a grunt. That implies an invasion, either on her part of ours. Not like she'll come to Mistral for anything less. She just might, that's the problem with immortality. He began to pace, countless new ideas already whirling through his head. It makes you reckless, fearless. And that's just the beginning. You get soft. You take hits you shouldn't. You don't bother to dodge. In short, sloppy. That's what Salem is right now, ladies and gentlemen. Sloppy. She thinks she's invincible. She isn't. A person without killer instinct isn't a person at all. She's already lost. She just hasn't realized it. Pretty sure immortality means you're invincible. Raven opined. So what if she regenerates? Naruto rounded on her, unable to keep the smile from his face. So what if she can't die? So what if she can use magic? At the end of the day, she's just one person. Grim aside, she's not an unstoppable force. She just thinks she is. You said it yourself, Ashbin. His gaze cut back to their own immortal. The last time you fought her, she just tanked everything and used spells, no? At his nod, he clapped his hands together. She doesn't have the instinct for battle. I'll bet she barely knows how to swing a sword. For as long as I knew here, she ever relied on her magic. Here at last, Ashbin offered some useful information. Her spells, while powerful, were her only form of offense. Whatever the case, you should be wary of them. Amber looked away. Just how powerful is she? Alone? She's simply a strong spellcaster. Were I in my prime, I'm sure I could hold her to a standstill. Her Grimm are the true threat. That's assuming we even want to seal her at all. Another possibility struck Naruto, even as he spoke. Oz, have you tried talking to Salem? The silence that followed told him just how unpopular said idea already seemed to his allies was. Maybe make peace with her? Technically speaking, the two of you did start all this. Understatement of the century, there the younger Branwen took another swig from his flask. Messiest divorce ever. You tried to run off with the kids. I mean, I can see why, he shrugged, but there really wasn't any way that was going to end well. Course she overreacted. I'm well aware of my mistakes. For a moment, Ashbin's gaze flashed. No one regrets them more than I. Yes, I'll just call up the Grimlands, shall I? I'm sure she'll pick right up. No, he sank back into his seat and demurred with a sigh. Too much time has passed now. She would kill me on sight. Raven scoffed. Another of your failures. Naruto felt his heart sink into his stomach. But surely you've tried? Ashbin couldn't meet his disbelieving gaze. Have not? No. Naruto. Kurama knew his thoughts first. Don't. Maybe someone should. For the first time in ages, the Jinchuriki ignored his partner. We know where she is. Jin showed us in that vision. I could talk to her. Ashbin's face went curiously blank at those words. Maybe she just needs a friend. She's been alone for a long time. If we tried to reason with her silence. He risked a glance over his shoulder, wondering why no one had responded. Amber was deathly pale. Raven looked like he'd just stabbed her. Crow had dropped his flask and clutched at his heart. Vernal stood on the verge of tears. Jin alone took his side, levitating slightly in her seat. Anything is possible, I suppose. She crossed one leg over the other as she considered his words. No one's bothered to talk to the lonely girl in quite some time. As her equal more than that, I'd say Naruto could certainly force her to hear him out, if nothing else. Absolutely not. Ashbin burst to his feet with a shout and cut her off. You mustn't go near anywhere her. Naruto felt the beginnings of a frown dimple his whiskered visage. Why not? I could be there and back before morning. She'll kill you. Amber latched onto his right arm, fingernails digging in painfully. Even you can't wade through an army of Grimm by yourself. Was it wrong that he liked being underestimated? I really can. He really could, if he wanted to. And he did. Even without Kurama, he could cut through most Grimm like chaff. He'd not seen any terribly large ones. And he had an army all his own. No one was faster than him. It would be so easy. Blitz the tower with clones, slip in and find her, wrestle her down and give her a good talking to. He'd convinced worse monsters before. Moreover, he couldn't get a certain image out of his head. Her bloodied body riddled with wounds, blades and axes sticking through her torso. Salem had tried to kill herself many times. So many times. She struck him as someone who wanted to die, even after all she'd been through. And if she couldn't, she'd try to end everything else. But it didn't have to be that way. If someone would just talk to her, you can't leave. Vernal seized his left leg, snapping him back to reality. She gazed up at him with wide, teary eyes. You promised to train me. You're my teacher. Naruto winced. Look, I'll be fine. No, she buried her head in his side. Hey, he threw up his free arm in exasperation. Why is everyone so against this? It's not like I'd be marching to my death. Raven grabbed his wrist and wrenched it behind his shoulders. Naruto blinked, briefly taken aback by the sudden betrayal. Then he realized just how light her grip was. He could have broken it with a single finger. She was trembling. Was she truly that afraid of Salem? Or was it something else entirely? I won't let you indulge in this foolishness. Scarlet slits cut into angry azure orbs. You'll be throwing your life away. He'd only just opened his mouth to refuse when Crow's arm wrapped around his shoulders in a tight vice. Nothing personal, kid. His grin was utterly unapologetic. But we can't let you do that. Can't? Blue eyes rolled. You do realize this won't stop me. None of you can. We know. Amber held tighter. Please don't make us fight you. None of them wanted to hurt him. He could sense that much. But they were terrified, each of them. Their fear of Salem certainly played a part in it, but there was another more powerful component at work here. Amber and the rest were not afraid of him, but rather of losing him. It was a strangely humbling notion. That may well be, but what will you do once you find Salem? Ashbins finally spoke again. His voice was sharp, the first hint of real anger showing through his normally placid visage. Infiltrate her forces? Spy on her? He held up a quick hand to forestall his argument. You do a better job than most, to be sure, but it won't work. Some people cannot be swayed with words. Salem is such a being. Naruto grit his teeth. We won't know unless we try. I have tried, the sage shouted. So many times he swept a hand across his desk, scattering the papers there to the wind. I dared not face her myself, but I sent countless spies into her ranks. None of them came back, not one. They were either killed or turned. She can sway even the most righteous of souls to her cause. My wife Salem is not as she once was. Surely Jin showed you that. His fist slammed down on the desk, cratering the wood. The Salem you saw, the woman you glimpsed in those memories, she is gone. And no one mourns that fact more than I. He crossed the desk quickly, moving to stand before him. Her humanity has been stripped away. Only a hollow shell remains. If she manages to kill you, everything we have just discussed will be moot. I don't believe that. In a single wild moment he realized they'd never agree with him. They couldn't see this as he could. They were too hidebound by their fear. Try as he might, he couldn't begrudge his friends for that. They wanted what they thought was best for him. They'd never agree on this. But he lied through his teeth. I won't go. Amber leaned against him. Promise? Yes, I promise. He stomped his feet for good measure, SWN now grinning Vernal around. I swear I won't set these 2 feet in Salem's domain. Well, unless I'm pulling one of you out of the fire. He tacitly said nothing about a shadow clone. Or 2. Or 3. Or 4. Why not go all the way and make it 9? After all, Shadow's clones weren't truly him. He could only give them commands, not control them directly. If someone popped them, he'd have all the intel he needed. Best of both worlds. Amber and the rest would understand. So why did he feel so guilty? In his heart of hearts, Naruto truly felt that all of this could have been solved if someone just talked to Salem after Asuma's death. If somebody took her aside and helped her to grieve, she might have grown as person. But they hadn't. Asuma had been her all. Her everything. Without him, she had nothing. And with his death, she went mad. Maybe she wasn't the villain here at all. Perhaps the gods were to blame. This was one big rotten mess he'd fallen into, but he was resolved to make the most of it. Jin caught his eye and knew his intent, bound to him as she was. She nodded but once. At least someone understood. And so Naruto plastered a smile to his face that he didn't feel, pretending to drop the subject. He was very, very, very good at faking smile. He'd been doing it since he was a child. Now let me go. Reluctantly, everyone did. Raven still glowered at him. Reckless fool. He grinned back. Ah, You do care I'm touched her pale face flushed and a shove sent him stumbling forward. Pieces off one way or another, Naruto continued as he wriggled his way free, we're gonna yank the rug right out from under Salem. Assuming words fail, we could always seal her away. When no rebuttal was given, his frown deepened. What? Do none of you know what sealing is? What about genjutsu? The silence deepened and he slapped his forehead. Right, different world, different rules. Forgot about that. Ashbin thumbed his chin and stood once more, cane forgotten at his desk. What cannot be killed can be sealed. That's it. I don't know any sealing jutsu yet. Naruto cautioned. I'd have to consult Kurama. He might remember a few. I've seen a few in my day. I'll try to recall them for you. Oz barely seemed to hear him. Just as quickly he sank back in his seat, covered his eyes with one hand, and began to laugh. It was a rare, genuine sound, the cry of a man finally set free. Crow glanced at him askance, baffled by this unexpected outburst, but he waved the man down. This was perfect. Beyond even his wildest dreams. He could imagine the man's thoughts now. A way out. He finally had a way out of this God's Force Kenshido war. Poor Sod looked positively giddy. Those are angles I'd not considered. His fingers twitched restlessly before they found his cane again. We have an unprecedented opportunity here. Fall, spring, and winter. All in one's place. We'd only need summer to complete the set. 4 maidens would be of great help against Salem. Naruto's BLD ran cold. Wait, did you say winter? Ashbin blinked at that. I did. But Amber groaned. No. Naruto's frown redoubled as he scratched the back of his head. Why did it feel like he was forgetting something? A niggling sensation of doubt tickled the back of his mind, a pebble in the proverbial shoe. Try as he might, he couldn't fish it out. Blue eyes squinted in thinly veiled annoyance. All the while that tingling, palpable sense of dread continued. Just what was he forgetting? Kurama chortled softly. Something important. Well, I know that, but the elevator doors crashed open. Naruto Uzumaki Winter Schnee emerged, saber at the ready, eyes burning with ice-blue flames. I would have words with you. Crow stepped back, leaving him to his fate. Yeah, kinda expected that Winter paid him no mind. She had only one target and stalked towards it, full of fire and fury. Yup. She was just as he remembered. Rigid and unyielding, with a temper that bellied her name. But the burning eyes? Those were new. Now that he looked at them, they rather resembled, oh dear. Those were the eyes of a maiden. He knew them well enough by now to recognize the telltale flames. How could he have forgotten something like this? Hadn't he been shanghaied into a date with her, too? One he never attended, thanks to the machinations of Raven Branwen. Naruto pinched the brow of his nose as his doom stalked towards him. Hey, Winter. Her fury flickered for a moment. Are those your final words? Not really? He offered an awkward shrug as she came to a halt before him. I know you're angry and all, but really, this ain't my fault. Without missing a beat, the blonde whirled and threw Raven under the proverbial bus that was Winter Schnee. This one here kidnapped me. I really didn't have a say in the matter. Such a shame. He laid on thick, knowing what would happen next. I was looking forward to it, too. Amber gagged. Naruto made a mental knot to make it up to her later. Slowly but surely, the wrath began to bleed away from Winter's frigid expression. Truly? Hey, Raven scowled at him, no doubt realizing his next move. Bratn't you dare. He hooked a thumb over his shoulder. That's her right behind me, by the way. The spring maiden squawked. Traitor, so you're Raven Branwen. Winter rounded on her. I'm afraid he and I have a prior engagement. I'll have to kill you now. I find that strong to believe. Raven thumbed her blade free from its sheath, exposing a hint of crimson steel within. He has a thing for older women. Amber all but choked on her tongue. Naruto's hand stuck his forehead with an audible pop. Of course. Spite her and she'd spite him right back. Two could play that game, really? This from the woman who came on to me. He didn't even have to finish that sentence. Winter glared pale daggers at Raven. In his peripherals, he watched Spring sneer right back. Flames were already flickering in their eyes. Even a blind man could see what was about to happen. Nope. All the nope. He was too tired to deal with these shenanigans tonight, let alone fend off 3 angry maidens. No, wait, now that he looked at her, Amber hadn't interjected herself into their conflict at all. She looked more miserable than anything else. Another one? He heard her morose mutter. I'll never catch up at this rate? Naruto felt his heart twitch. Couldn't have that now, could they? There was only one course of action to take. His eyes strayed toward Ashbin's window, calculating the long drop below. Kurama groaned, realizing what they were about to do. Naruto shifted a bit closer to Amber, putting her well within arm's reach. Not a bad drop, as far as he was concerned. They could survive that easily. Flight was a handy ability to have, when he remembered to use it. Vale was a big place. He and Amber could slip away in the city until Raven and Winter cooled their heads. He liked the sound of that more and more. Amber stiffened only a little as his hand brushed hers. Do you trust me? Her gaze flicked to his, then back Winter and Raven. Neither noticed, busy butting heads as they were. Across the room, Ashbin quirked a brow, but made no move to interfere. On the contrary, he said something that left both of them squawking in anger and drew their wrath down on him. Bless his timeless soul. He felt her fingers thread with his. Then hold on. Wait, what are you doing? Sweeping Amber up into his arms. Oh, how she yelped. Naruto shot out Ashbin's window with a whoop. Glass shattered sullenly against aura. He laughed over it. You'll never take us alive. Neo had seen some crazy shit in her day. This was Vale after all. Weird stuff happened here all the time. If it wasn't huntsmen tearing up the place or a giant golden fox roaring at Beacon, it was something else. Life was just like that sometimes. Neo liked to think she was rather inured to it by now. You had to be in a place like this. Shit happened. Either learned to deal with it or you got squashed. It took a special sort to deal with Roman's flamboyant behavior after all. The antics he pulled put Valian bullshit to shame. Still, he was her dum-dum and practically her father at that after all, and so she put up with this as much as she did him. Yet, sometimes a girl needed a break. Such was the purpose of her little evening jaunt. No heists, no mischief, just a nice simple evening walk to distress and possibly stab anyone who crossed her path. Really, stabbing was the best way to vent stress, she found. Oh wait, she told a lie. Ice cream was the best. Maybe she'd raid a shop or two. Wouldn't do to let her stash run low. Really, things had been downright boring since Whiskers left. Neo scowled and kicked a stray pebble in the street, sending it slamming into a stray trash can. The distant clatter rang like a hollow bell, trailing her languid stride like a second shadow. Chaos seemed to follow that one wherever he went. Neo liked chaos, you see, almost as much as she liked broken things. And she hadn't seen him in quite some time. Really, she was beginning to wonder if he'd fled Vale altogether. Her lips quirked in a scowl at the notion. That would make things less interesting in the coming months. To be sure, Roman's employer had a vested interest in Naruto Uzumaki. Whisker-san for the time being. They were stuck dancing to her tune, twisted though it was. They needed him in Vale. Neo wasn't sure why. She wasn't about to ask. Frankly, the Fire Beach scared her. But anyone who could hurt said Fire Beach frightened her even more. Whiskers might be the key to getting Roman out from Cinder's thumb altogether. So when the man in question simply fell out of the sky with a girl in his arms? Well, Neo wasn't about to question it. Mismatching eyes lit up at the sight of them. Speak of the devil, or was it devils in this case? And he shall appear. She couldn't have asked for a better opportunity if presented itself to her on a silver platter. This must be fate. Divine providence and all that. Don't look a gift horse in the mouth, that sort of thing. She certainly wouldn't. Neo took it for the sign it was and changed course to intercept them, lingering only a little. That girl with him seemed almost familiar. Had she seen her somewhere before? You're mad, the girl in question giggling and slapped at his easy with one hand, running the other through her windswept hair. I didn't know you could fly. Sorry, Amber. I really don't use it all that often. You should. Neo crept closer, wrapping her semblance about herself like a shroud as she skipped after the two of them, all the while listening intently. These two seemed familiar with one another. Curious. The name Amber struck a chord somewhere in her mind, but she just couldn't place it. So she contented herself to follow at a distance. In doing so, she learned a great deal. Hope you don't mind staying at a hotel tonight. Whiskers scratched the back of his head as they walked. I really don't want to go back to Beacon right now. Too much of a headache, and all, you know? Oh, it's fine. Amber touched a hand to his shoulder, her palm lingering a little longer than strictly necessary. You turned Winter against Raven like it was nothing. Was that intentional? Yup. Didn't feel like either of them, so I settled for the next best thing. They'll be squabbling for weeks after this, if not months. Her gaze flashed, framing a small smile. Don't think your silver tongue will work on me, mister. 10 knuckles collided with his shoulder in a light punch. No persuasion checks here, Neo tittered softly. This girl was alright. She had moxie. No mindless follower she, this huntress was clearly more than seemed. Then again, the same could be said of Whiskers. Oh, he acted the fool and played the ponce well enough, but she wasn't fooled. He walked like a warrior. There was a certain surety to everything he did, from his movements, words, and even his breathing. Not someone she wanted to tangle with if she could help it. Naruto winked. Whatever you say, partner. That's right, partner. Amber elbowed him, and for a moment, her eyes burned with flame. Actual living flame. And don't you forget it. Neo nearly missed a step. Bugger. Now she knew where that name came from. Amber. Fall Maiden. The one Cinder had been hunting. But she was here now, safe and sound, while Cinderwell. They'd seen the scars over that scroll. No mistaking those. Suddenly the idea of the serving the fire beach seemed even less palatable. Roman would need to be told. Before it was too late. So she kept following. Still, Amber posited, stifling a yawn against the back of her palm, we could use 2 teammates, people to watch our back, people that aren't Raven and Winter. Naruto picked at an ear with a yawn of his own. Don't Jin and Vernal count? No, they're far too young, and you know it. To the untrained eye, Neo knew she appeared as little more than a shimmer of air. None could see her, much less sense her. She could walk right behind them, and no one would be the wiser. She followed them through the city, lingering only a little when they stopped and got food from a late-night faunus vendor. Her footsteps were silent. None could possibly detect her. Without warning, Naruto twitched. There was no transition from looked over his shoulder at Neo, now only a few paces away. Dead at her. Those keen blue eyes flashed golden and pierced her illusion, drilled right through her confidence and stripped it all away. Pearly white teeth flashed in a small smile. For a moment said smile resembled that of a bemused fox. His lips parted, moving to mouth 3 words. I see you. Neo felt something yank on her mind. For a horrid moment she saw a giant red eye, just glaring at her, and with it a monstrous beast. She was close to it. Far too close. For a fleeting moment her psyche was somewhere else entirely. She saw her reflection in an awful iris and whimpered. Hello, little jester. Neo's resolve abandoned her. She stumbled back, catching herself on a wall. Her body tensed instead, blood gone to ice in her veins. Flight or fight howled to life and went to war with one another within her head. She'd been made. Somehow he had seen her, noticed her at the very least. She skittered to the side, only for those strange shimmering orbs to follow her. His slanted pupils narrowed upon her, neck craning in the subtle shake of the head. Amber frowned at him. What is it? Did you see someone? Nah, he could have outed her, but didn't. It's nothing. His smile lingered as he turned away. Neo ran ahead of them, no longer making any effort to conceal herself or her footsteps. Time to make her entrance. Well past time. Something told her she would die if she kept up her illusion any longer. Best to appear on her terms rather than theirs before they sprung whatever trap they had planned. Better safe than sorry. With a sound not unlike shattering glass, she revealed herself. The woman tensed at her sudden revelation, but Naruto, aware all along, only laughed. Oh, hey, I thought it might be you. Her blonde grinned, looking more alive than she remembered. Neo, was it? Good to see you. A tan hand descended to muss her hair as a brother might a younger sibling they were particularly fond of. How've you been? Did you need something? Neo squirmed back with a scowl. Still, since she'd been so kind as to ask why not? She was hungry after that little scare. The mute girl grinned at him and tugged his sleeve. Her eyes flitted down to the pocket where she knew he kept his wallet. A bead of sweat ran down Naruto's brow. She saw it and grinned at him, then pivoted on one heel and pointed a ways down the street. Amber frowned, quirking a dark brow. Naruto saw where he was pointing and sighed. Only a blind man would have missed the familiar parlor only a few blocks down the street. Neo opened her mouth, clasped her hands, and made a less than subtle gesture. Naruto sighed. For the love of what is it with you and ice cream? Amber's frown redoubled. I feel like I'm missing something here. Neo giggled silently, proud of her choice. He would be hers. Whiskers just didn't know it yet. Life is nothing but a game of survival, with no one to trust and no one to rely on. But sometimes you find yourself at a crossroad, believing that life could change. I too once believed in that life. I thought life would be more than just survival. What a mistake. I've seen bodies scattered at my feet, their BLD red like roses, beauty that bloomed thrown into the fire. And for what? A hopeless cause. I told myself I would not be like that. Never again. I refused to be fooled by Lefito's sacrifice myself for nothing like Summer did. Because I have always been a survivor. And then you came along. You beat me senseless and yet in defeat, you gave me hope again. And now this I thought was prepared for anything but not this. It's all your fault, Demon you. Naruto Demon you've made me weak. Taming the Seasons brothers our time is now a lone shadow clone planted a boot in the fell dirt of the Grimlands and move a determined finger at Salem's tower in the distance. His stoic declaration echoed long and loud into the evening. A flock of giant nevermore wheeled in the sullen skies high above, uncaring of the madman perched upon the rocky outcropping. An alpha Beowulf slouched past not a mile away, blissfully unaware of him. Undaunted by the silent reception, Naruto's doppelganger flung up his arms and prattled on. Long have we walked, long have we waited, but no longer today we face Salem. Only the wind answered his speechifying. A stray dust devil tumbled past, blown by that lazy gale. Someone coughed. Yeesh, tough crowd. The clone palmed his face with a sigh. Am I really the only one excited about this? We finally completed our mission. Thus speaking, he turned to face his comrades in arms. At his back 8 of his brothers awaited him, 4 to each side. Each stood clad in a worn cloak of their own. Each looked positively run down. Their faces dirty, eyes tired, shoulders slumped from what had proven a grueling journey thus far. Not a one congratulated him. Aren't you being a little dramatic? One of them asked. And we haven't completed anything yet. Come on, let him have this. Another reasoned. We've been walking for weeks. We're finally here. I'd say that calls for a little celebration. Thank you. It had taken 9 of them the better part of 3 months to find their way here, and their numbers had paid dearly for it. They had been many when they'd first set out. Now they were few. Some had gotten lost in the kingdoms. Others were distracted by settlements that needed their help. Still more overestimated their own skills and got themselves dispelled for their own arrogance. But that's a story for another time. You see, they'd also made something of a discovery during their journey. Lo and behold, Grim didn't recognize a shadow clone as a person. Each of them gave off negativity well enough when distressed, but at the end of the day they were neither flesh nor BLD and thus presented far less of a lure to the creatures of the Grim. Unless a clone walked right up and smacked a Beowulf on the snout, it wasn't likely to attack. So what's the plan? I mean, what are we gonna do? Another raised their hand. Steal her silverware? A ripple of laughter ran through their little group, a bit of calm before the storm. The lead clone sighed. Not like we could keep it anyway. Amber's gonna kill the boss when she finds out. Someone grumbled. Which is exactly why she won't find out. The lead clone buelled its head against that of its brethren. Not from any of us. He gave the offender a little shake for good measure, to the better to impart its message. We either complete our mission or die trying. Understand? A quick glance between the 9 of them confirmed his suspicions. No getting captured, no stupid heroics, nothing. He swung a finger between each of them. We've all been reinforced with a good bit of chakra, so I know you can take a hit or two. Don't be stupid. Someone decided to play devil's advocate. But what if she's got prisoners? Fine, then we try to rescue those. But anything here is either inhuman or crazy, so I wouldn't put much stock in that. I see you there, 3. He pointed to another clone as their hand shot up. The boss wants us to try and talk to Salem, so that's what we're gonna do. Their de facto leader offered a careless shrug. It hasn't failed us so far. A 6th titled their head. What? You want to WHP out the OL talk no jutsu? Nope. The lead clone rubbed its hand together. Better. The clone collective blinked at him. Better how? Their leader smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. We've come to bargain. Naruto blinked. Twice. Thrice. You're going to make me a weapon? It's been months. Why this sudden interest? Yes, Amber preened, cheeks gone rosy at the praise. I may not look it, but I come from a family of proud weaponsmiths. I don't really use a weapon though? He shrugged beneath her pleading gaze. I mean, I can summon a staff. She clasped her hands and gave him the watery eyes. Plies? All his defiance wilted like a drooping rose. Go ahead. Break a leg. Amber didn't give him a chance to say anything more. Naruto blinked and found himself staring a cloud of dust. Well, someone's excited. She really is one of a kind, isn't she? I'm glad you saved her. Leave it to Winter to finally corner him when his guard was down. Naruto rose from his pointed crouch as the pointed click of boots reached his ears. The hour was, well, not exactly late on this side of the world, but it wasn't early either. All around them the faint sounds of nature echoed through the clearing, broke only by the faint crackling of the sundered log in his sights. Diamond thing had seen better days. He'd nearly shattered it with a single punch. And right now? Winter Schnee looked like she wanted to shatter him. You're not going with her, today? She asked as much. The two of you are usually joined at the hip. She's really keen on forging a weapon for me. Naruto spared a rueful grin for the city in the distance. She wouldn't take no for an answer. A lot of you are like that. He flicked a glance over his shoulder, where Neo was happily sunning herself. At least he assumed she was. Strong to tell with the sunglasses. She could be sleeping for all he knew. Neo wasweflo. He was beginning to think she saw him as her property. Even a pet had more rights than that. He also got the sense that she wasn't quite a good person, but as she had yet to commit any crimes in his presence, stealing copious amount of ice cream didn't count. He was inclined to her let be. For now. At least Vernal could be bribed with food and training. He'd have to get Crow around for distracting her today. I have something for you. Naruto quirked a brow, but nevertheless caught the parcel Winter flung sailed his. Wrapping paper? A present, thin. He tore it open quick and found himself starting at what appeared to be what were these, tickets? Try as he might, he couldn't make heads or tails of them. Just one. You've been doing your best to avoid me for the last 3 months. It wasn't a question. He looked up to find Winter's gaze drilling into his own, implacable as an Atlesian blizzard. I thought it high time we made an end of this, one way or another. Those, she indicated the tickets in his hand, are reservations, booked a week in advance, in the finest restaurant this side of Vale. Tomorrow evening, He managed eloquently. Or you could tear them up here and now. His expression must have proven telling because she hastened to explain. I'm a big girl, Naruto. I can handle rejection. But I don't want to hear it from you. A finger pushed into his tea, grinding into the fabric of his jacket. I want to speak with the man who shouted me down and changed my mind. And not the coward who's been skulking in the shadows for the last 12 weeks. When he didn't speak, she took her hand away and planted the other upon her hip. If you want nothing to do with me, say it now. In his defense, he was doing his darndest to learn the art of sealing, the better to deal with Salem if things went awry. He didn't have time for distractions if only because it was so damn strong. Amber understood that. She'd given him space for the most part and done her darndest to keep him in good spirits. Raven came and went as she pleased. Winter was problematic, to say the least. She was just so and pushy and you're back in Vale because? Officially? A faint smile plucked at her pale lips. I've been stationed here to oversee diplomatic relations and prepare for the approaching Vital Festival, though it's still a ways away. And unofficially? That is complicated. Winter looked away. A boot scuffed against the dirt. You may be cross with me. No, I won't. Truth be told, he didn't know her enough to be cross. Was that a good thing? I'm hunting the woman who tried to kill Amber. She's been sighted in Vale. Never mind. Naruto's mind did an 180. What are you thinking? Amber nearly died to her and you haven't even had your powers for a year. I don't see why you're so concerned. Winter looked away with a huff. You said it yourself. We barely know one another. That was no excuse and she knew it. I still don't want to see you die. She pounced on his response. You do care she's got you there. Too late, Naruto realized the trap he'd fallen into. He pulled a face and looked away. Try as he might to ignore it, There was undoubtedly a part of him that was attracted to Winter. Not the calm and composed soldier she pretended to be, but rather the fiery woman lurking beneath her icy facade. He'd seen her temper. He wanted to see it again. Where had that thought come from again? No resist DMN Raven for awakening him to this sort of thing. Life was better without lust. Wasn't it? All I ask is for a chance. Winter reached out to clasp his hands in her own. Let me show you who I really am. Not this, she waved a hand at her uniform, the neat bun of her hair, and the pristine attire she wore. We got off on the wrong foot, and I'd like nothing more than to make amends. His brow furrowed. I'm still not sharing the secrets of chakra with you. Frankly, I don't expect you to. Her admittance startled him. Winter wasn't a bad person, a bit too rigid perhaps, but she'd grown as a person since their last fight. And he disliked the idea of her dying. Weiss would murder him if anything happened to her big sister. He'd heard more than enough about her temper to last him a lifetime. He certainly didn't want to run afoul of her, though it might be amusing to see her sputter and flail at him. He imagined a mini Winter in his head, a young girl with thrice the sass of her elder sibling. A wry burst of laughter escaped him. Still holding one of his hands, Winter seeked her head like a wary hawk. You're smiling. Nah, just thinking how alike you and Weiss must be. That's hardly, she bit down, silencing herself as her face burned. No, you're right. As he looked on, the specialist reached across herself with her left hand and gripped her wrist. I was a bit of a prat when we first met, wasn't I? Naruto quirked a golden brow. A bit? Well, you weren't much better. Another eyebrow rose. All right, she flung up her arms in a short, sharp motion. You win. The motion did interesting things to her bosom. I was horrid, forcing myself on you like that. Her eyes flashed with blue flames for but a moment, then she looked away. And for that she seemed to physically grapple with the word for a moment. I apologize. Well. He never thought he'd see the day. This was the Winter he liked. The woman. Not the Winter Maiden. Not Ironwood's puppet. Not a stoic specialist of Atlas. Beneath all that, she was a person. He wanted to get to know that person. Not someone here under duress, nor a soulless drone obeying orders. Winter Schnee. Not the heiress. The woman before him. It wasn't entirely your fault. He met her halfway. I was stressed out of my mind. And I'm going to bed. Kurama slammed a door in his mind. Wake me when you've finished wooing the woman. Blue eyes rolled, but he lowered himself onto a fallen log nevertheless. Join me? Very well. Winter laughed. It was a surprisingly soft sound and did just that. I believe I will take you up on that offer. A beat of silence pushed its way between the two of them. Not painful by any means or measure, just simple, contemplative quiet. Winter broke it first. I must say, this went easier than expected. I thought you'd turn me down. Maybe he should. But was it so wrong to live once in a while? He'd had his nose to the grindstone for months now, with precious little progress to show for it. Maybe a break was just what he needed. Yeah, I'm not the one you need to convince. That'd be Amber. The Winter Maiden frowned. You and Raven aren't? Now it was Naruto's turn to wince. That's well, it's complicated. He scratched at a whiskered cheek. I beat her in fair combat. Apparently that means something to her. She comes and goes when she pleases these days. A self-same smile plucked at the corner of his mouth. I don't even know where she is now. Probably off doing tribe stuff. A hand dipped into his pocket and came up with the scroll she'd given him. She'll come calling if give her a ring. You kept it? Winter blinked, recognizing the case. I thought you would have thrown it away. Naruto felt his ears burn pink. Look, it's nothing. Don't read into it. She leaned forward. Her forehead touched his. Oh, I'm doing all the reading. They were nearly ready now. Cinder gazed at her ruined visage in the mirror and smiled. He's already lost. He just hasn't realized it yet. It would all be hers. Breathe. She just had to breathe. In. Raven Branwen exhaled softly as she went about her morning routine, the steady series of steps that had brought her balance over the last 12 weeks. She washed her face in a nearby stream, ate some venison she'd cooked herself, and continued to eke out a simple existence in the forests of Vale. She lived on no one's sufferance save her own. She would not return to the tribe unless asked. Not Ashbin, not Taeyong, and certainly not Naruto. Her brow twitched and she shoved such thoughts away. Ignore the past. Don't fixate on the future. Focus on the Harem no. Such was life. Such was balance. To think otherwise was to throw herself into disarray. She willed her mind to become a calm pool, placid and still, a lake of serenity. To lose herself in the simple task of living and in doing so, blind herself to all else. It didn't quite work as intended. Her mind began to drift to a certain blonde, so she busied herself with other tasks. She set her hand upon Omen's blade and pushed a whetstone across its naked edge, steadily sharpening it with the tender care a mother might give her child. She flinched but a little at the reminder both of her sins and her own sinking suspicion. A fresh wave of nausea assailed her and what little she'd eaten threatened to come boiling back up. So much for ignoring the past or the future. With a snarl, Raven shook her head and continued to scrap her stone against Omen's edge. That wasn't happening. It just wasn't possible. She'd caught a bug, come down with something, that was all. Time had passed since she'd found herself back in Vale. Here, once more among weaklings, fighting an impossible battle. No, the stone missed as the elder Branwen chastised herself for the slip. Not impossible. They had a fighting chance now. Salem was down 2 pawns. Most of the maidens had rallied to Naruto's cause, and the relic of knowledge was effectively neutralized. So long as Jin held to her physical form, and it seemed that no one could ask her a question. Likewise, Naruto was fast becoming a reliable ally. Scary as hell too. She'd seen the aftermath of what he'd done to Hazel and Tyrion. He'd demolished his enemies like a human meat grinder. The best isn't the smartest, or even the strongest, she thought to herself. The best is the fiercest. Back in the tribe, that would be the biggest door-die in the entire camp. It was the reckless ones you needed to watch out for. They were tough, indestructible, and F-King ruthless. Naruto had the potential to become all that and more. He just had to let go those petty little morals he'd become so fond on. He just needed a push. Salem didn't care about honor or pride, or any of those things. She would tear you apart from the inside, grant you a death so slow you never saw it coming. And when it did, you thought it your own fault. She would do whatever it took to win. Consequences be damned. Even Naruto, mighty as he was, wasn't immune to such a strategy. So long as he kept his spirits up and his guard with it, he would endure whatever she threw his way. But if he allowed fear and doubt to invade his mind, if he hesitated, Raven grit her teeth. Why was she still here? By rights, this wasn't her fight anymore. She'd done her part when she opened the vault. They didn't need her. Salem's attention would shift to Atlas, Vacuo, then Vale. She could run and no one would miss her. Vanish into the wilderness. Make a new life of her own. Not even Naruto would be able to find her, she hoped. The boy could be a DMN good tracker when he wanted to be. So why was she still here? Once more, the whetstone SCD against her blade. The sound only served to further irritate her, even as a muscle jumped in her jaw. Really, this was all Naruto's fault. If he hadn't caught her eye while she was spying on Crow, she never would have kidnapped him. None of this would have happened. None of this. But if she hadn't stolen him away, Ashbin would still have his secrets, and his allies would be wallowing in their ignorance. When you phrased it like that, it made her sound like a big God's damned hero. Raven hated heroes. Heroes died. They ran right in, regardless of the odds, sallied forth in the face of danger and got themselves killed. Just like Summer Rose. The thought brought with it a fresh pang of anger, regret, and guilt. Summer had been a hero. Summer was a leader. Summer wanted to save everyone in front of her. Summer died. By contrast, Raven wasn't a hero. She was a coward. A survivor. She would do whatever it took to survive. Those who ran away lived to fight another day. If being smart left her with that disgrace F label, then so be it. She had survived worse odds before, and she would survive this now. Behind her, the brush stirred, drawing a sigh from the spring maiden. She'd spent all these weeks squatting out here to avoid this very scenario. Her eyes flamed and her senses shifted. So much for that. Sound slowly died as her guests made their way into the clearing. She didn't dare look up, but her gaze did shift just a hair, just a touch enough to glimpse a flash of color in her peripherals. She recognized the little blue girl among them. Jin, you just had to meddle, didn't you? I am a being of knowledge, after all. The little imp grinned. I wish to know where you were. And so, I simply followed your trail. Raven's head snapped up, lips parted in a scathing snarl. That trail wasn't meant for a nosy spirit masquerading as a girl. Hey, Lilac eyes met scarlet. Panic bleeded in her head and her mind whirled, fight and fight clouding every thought. Portal now somewhere anywhere. Her hand flew to Omen's hilt, aching for action. A single cut would create the tether she needed to escape. She had but to dive into it, and she would be spared this hideously uncomfortable exchange. For words held her back in the form of a familiar, disappointed sigh. Some other you are. Omen slammed back into its sheath with an audible click. For the first time in her life, Raven Branwen ignored her instincts and didn't run. Hello, young. She set her blade down, the sound echoing hollowly in the woods. I imagine you have questions. Lilac eyes flashed red. Just like that? An arm flung out, swiping at her. After all this time? I'm tired of running. And she was. Tired of so many things. You found me. Isn't that enough? No, her daughter stomped a foot, splintering the ground. You don't get to say that now you left me. Why? I did what I thought was best at the time. The truth burned, even after all these years. Now I see I was wrong. I should have taken you with me. Yang made a keening noise through her teeth, but didn't rise to the bait. Raven respected that. This was her little girl grown so much from the babe she'd held in her arms on that fateful day. Not a girl, not quite a woman. She'd be attending Beacon soon. And once she did, she and her team would fall under Ashbin's sway. Just like Team SRQ. She had a terrible vision of it all, young, lost and alone, grieving for her friends, for all that she'd lost. Just like her. Not again. Never, ever again. Would Naruto be there to save her daughter if she bit off more than she could chew? Or would he be elsewhere, having his own adventures? It was foolish to rely on him for everything. Just as she'd come to rely on him. Another wave of nausea stemmed from her stomach. Raven touched a hand to it and bit down on her lip until she tasted blood. Only then did she dare to move. She plunked down on an upturned log, steeped her fingers, and laid her chin atop them. I'll leave you to it, then. Jin wandered away with a wave. Raven glowered bloody red daggers after her. And where are you going? Places. The little blue girl chirruped. So many things to see and learn, so little time. Yang hung her head and murmured a hasty word of thanks. Jin's stride didn't falter, and within moments she was gone. Good riddance. Let her go pester Naruto or someone else. Anyone else. She wanted nothing to do with a clever little girl like that. Too much trouble by half. She'd never understand what Naruto and Amber saw in that one sit, daughter. She gestured with her good arm. I'll tell you everything. To her credit, Yang tried to hold fast. She really did. But she couldn't. Little blonde broke with a warble. Because that is your right. You excuse me? A new voice interjected. Can I say something? Raven blinked, then leaned to one side, alarmed to find someone behind her daughter. Much to her chagrin, Yang hadn't come alone. There was another with her. A girl with silver eyes. Summer's eyes. Raven's heart skipped a beat. For a moment, she thought she was looking at a younger Summer. Some of her shock must have shown through, for the girl took one look at her and hid behind Yang. Timid little thing. But she couldn't find it in herself to reprimand her for her cowardice. And who is this? Yang says you. The younger girl swallowed once, then steeled herself and buelled on. You knew me, Mom? Raven's heart twitched. Blast it all. Naruto really had made her weak. In another life she would have scoffed and walked away. Now she couldn't bear to do so. Retreating now meant abandoning this little waif to the same fate as her mother. She didn't deserve that. The sins of the parent were not the sins of the child. I did, little one. She seeked her head aside, considering this girl in red and black like the rare gem she was. What's your name? Arubi. The young one stuttered, fidgeted under her burning eyes, then steeled herself. My name is Ruby Rose. A coward would have run. Part of Raven still wanted to. Instead she smiled. Let me tell you a story. There's always a diamond in the rough. I've come to bargain Salem. I've come to bargain. The Queen of the Grim blinked. Then thrice. Her lips pinched into a scowl. You've come to die. Begone. A pale hand snapped up, cradling an ominous sphere of pure ebony within. Naruto stood his ground. He didn't run, didn't flee, didn't even beg for his life. He simply laughed. Laughed as he evaporated under a torrent of black light. And that, as they say, was that. Nothing remained. Naught but blackened stone. Salem lowered her open palm with a smile. That was certainly one way to rid oneself of a nemesis. He had been a fool to come here to her domain, where she was most powerful. Now that he was dead, another Naruto waltzed around the corner. Hey, Salem. He smiled at her. I've come to bargain, fool. Her eyes narrowed. You've come to wait. Confusion reared its ugly head as her gaze roved about the empty room, struggling to comprehend what was happening. Have we been here before? I feel like we've been here before. What is this? An illusion? Nope. Her guest leaned against a nearby wall and folded both arms before his. This is real. The witch raised both hands above her head and crossed her wrists. A second spell bolt speared him in the leaving naught but a gaping hole behind. Naruto pitched forward with a wordless croak and expired on the floor. But only for a moment. As she looked on, his body turned to so much smoke in the wind, smoke that blew away out a window. Yet another waltzed through the archway. Hello again. Salem, the thorn in her side, spread its arms wide with a grin. I've come to bargain. Salem looked left. Salem looked right. Left again. Right one last time, just to be sure. Madness. This was absolute madness. She was losing her mind. That, or she'd had too much wine this evening. Surely that was the case. There could be no other explanation. She must have imagined him. Yes, that made sense. How else could one man infiltrate her throne room? Alone, no less. She had legions of Grimm to command, to say nothing of her lieutenants. Were they truly so useless? So, Naruto beamed. What do you say? Want to sit down and talk this out? He even had the gall to offer her his hand. Let's be friends. Salem stabbed him through the heart and cast his corpse into a wall. Smoke spilled into the air anew. Salem, it was still fading when another waded through the mist. I've come to. A spear of ice drilled him into a wall. Stop, she held. A shadow moved. See, she slew that one too. And another when it appeared. Another heralded the second. Smoke filled the room, obscuring her vision. A fourth and a fifth accosted her, only to die by her hand. Fury built behind her eyes, the frustration mounting like a living thing as she peered into the haze. In a fit of pique, she unleashed the storm itself. Let her magic surge throughout the room as she sought to silence him. Windows shattered. The great table and its accompanying chairs flew into the air. The floor created. High above the ceiling buckled as she strained her reserves, to no avail. Laughter greeted her. What is happening? A gust of wind blew the smokescreen away. And she found herself standing before an army of many men with one's face. They filled the room, dozens strong, each looking upon her as though she were no more than a petulant child. Oh, this is a jutsu. The leader of the horde smiled. But you don't know what that is, do you? Just as you wield magic from your world, I brought some of mine. These are shadow clones. He raised his arms and the army mimicked him. Endless. Shadow clones. They spoke with him, among him. They were him. A dozen voices speaking in unison. For every one you kill, 10 more will spawn. You can't kill us. The pause. Well, you can, but the boss has chakra for days. We're a drop in the bucket for him. Salem clapped her hands and flame blossomed, destroying them all. See? Even more emerged from the heat haze. You're only making it worse on yourself. She grabbed one of them by their chin and ripped them from the ground. You cannot do this forever. Actually, I can. Naruto smiled down on her. This is how things are now. You and me, trapped in this moment. Endlessly. She smashed him into the ground and shattered his skull. Then you will spend eternity dying. Yes, a fresh shadow clone emerged and dusted one shoulder off. But everyone on Remnant will be safe from you. Watts and Cinder weren't here. To say nothing of her other allies. Without her, their efforts would be crippled. Fragmented at best. The plan would continue, to be sure, but if she was trapped, locked in her castle, forced to fight her way through an endless wave of clones who frankly seemed to be humoring her at this point, it made so many of, and yet you will suffer. Her nails dug into his skin, trailing wisps of smoke. The memories of your deaths will cripple the original. He lifted his chin in stoic defiance. Pain's an old friend. We can handle a little mental fatigue. Can you? It was a race then, a chase to see who broke first. Her mind or his? She would not break. She would not cower. She was Salem, she was mighty, she was eternal, she was lady. That's a nice monologue and all, but we can hear everything you're saying. Salem tore his head off. And this nope. Furious, she brought the ceiling down on his head. You will never win, maybe not. Another doppelganger sauntered out of the rubble, but I can lose, again and again and again. Forever. His grin gained a manic edge. And that makes you my prisoner. In hindsight, he really had no way of knowing the SWs she just flipped. Prisoner. Captive. Hostage. Salem's very being recoiled at the word. A prisoner. Just as she'd been so long ago. First to the tower, then to the gods, now to time itself. Never again. Her fingers ed into fists at her sides. Not that. Sharp nails bit into her palms. Anything but that. Black BLD sluiced down onto the floor. Just thinking of it threatened to drive her mad. She loathed it. Hate, she abhorred this, hated him, hated them all. She skewered another clone on her arm and still, the rest made no move to attack. Hatred became a frothing rage. I'll get out of here. Just you wait. She caught a clone by the leg and smashed it into 3 more, dispelling them in a wild plume of smoke. I'll find the original and kill him. Merry laughter slapped her threat down. You think that's the easy option, do ya? He victim grinned as his ruined body slid off her arm. No. The boss would slap you silly. You see, the shadow clone bantered on as another took its place. He's gotten attached to this world. Same goes for us. He was still smiling even when she ripped him in half. We don't want to see it end. The severed halves stared back at her. We have people to protect now. Didn't you feel the same once? What would your daughters think of you now? He knew? Of course he did. The lamp, you were a good person, once upon a time. The clone spoke softly, his words shrouded in silence. I think you can become that woman again. Salem's world bled red. He dared. He dared? To see the ugly secrets of her past was one thing, but he knew everything. Silence, she flung herself at the horde. Time began to blur. She wasn't sure how long she spent tearing into them, only that she did. Seconds passed. Minutes. Hours. She killed them in every conceivable way she could, flung them outside the tower, fed them to Grim, used magic to boil their very bodies from within. She gave herself to her instincts and raged mindlessly, centuries of hate and sorrow and spite surging to the fore. Rip and tear, salt the earth and burn them down. Kill until there was nothing left. All the while she screamed, "What do you know?" And still they came for her. Nothing less than nothing. None of them fought back. Not a once. What I've fought, what I've lost, none of it. They only prevented her from escaping the room. And each time, they simply repeated that same infernal phrase. Over and over. I've come to bargain. Finally, she found fury spent. Her body could not die, but the same could not be said of her spirit. Her rage was not infinite. She could only thrash about for so long before the boiling cauldron of her emotions exhausted itself once and for all. Exhaustion wasn't a concept she understood, not physically, but the mental aspect still affected her all the same. Her arms were weak, knees heavy. She felt sick to her stomach. Her once strong stride became a staggering limp. Still she forged on. You're just a boy, she stormed forward, casting another close aside as she made for the exit. A stupid, entitled boy who's known neither suffering nor hate, nor loneliness. Her fist slammed into an open palm. Cold blue eyes met hers. A different shadow clone growled, no more about those things than you can possibly imagine. Then I'll kill everything you love. She spat back, reveling in the way his right eye twitched. All your joy will turn to ashes in your mouth. That was a mistake. Here at last he struck back. A vicious twist of his wrist yanked her forward from there. A single blow slammed into then through her torso and bent her double. Salem gasped. Ribs creaked ominously as she folded over his limb like a limp rag. A starburst of pain burst through her world, taking any semblance of sense with it. He only hit me once. How am I this damaged? Look at you. You're just one big bundle of misdirected passion. His voice growled in her ear, cold and strong. Such a waste. Reckless pride, limbed by self-righteousness. He tore his limb free, leaving her to pitch forward and clutch at the gaping hole in her stomach. You are queen of nothing. Just a child raging at what she's lost. Look at you. He slammed a kick into her chin and sent her spinning to the floor. You stand there because I allow it. Because I do not fear. She grit her teeth and glared up at him. I cannot be, I'm well aware. Naruto dropped to his haunches before. The lamp showed me everything. Tell me, do you still experience pain? Salem grit her teeth and refused to rise to his bait, weighty though it was. Nay, never. She'd not give him the satisfaction. The blonde sighed. Well, there's one way to find out. Blue eyes flashed gold. The gaping tear in Salem's torso was still closing when Naruto conjured a strange blue sphere to his palm. It spat and snarled within his open hand, rimmed by tiny blades of keening wind as if it were shrieking in his fell grasp, aching to be unleashed. His arms seeked back, all of an instant from smashing a snarling blue sphere into her. And yet he hesitated. This is a raisin shuriken. He explained slowly, voice rising over the unholy shriek of his technique. An attack that pierces its target on a cellular level and rips them to pieces. Now, I know you're immortal, but I can tell you here and now, you've never taken an attack like this before. Salem shrank back at the sight of it. So you can feel pain still. Good to know. Make it stop. Her frustrated shrieks split the Grimlands. Set me free. No, the clone shook his head. We've come to bargain. Salem surged up, grabbed him by the throat and rammed his back into a crumbling wall. Placid blue eyes met blazing red. No fear. Not even a glimmer of hesitation. She wasn't used to that. Did the original feel no fear as well? Something for her to investigate someday, perhaps. Provided she escaped this trap. What do you want? To talk. His reply was instant, his resolve unfaltering. Give you bit of advice, maybe even some counseling. She scoffed. I have no need of such things. See, I thought you might say that. Raven once told me there's more than one way to skin a deer. His eyes flashed with something dark indeed. At the time, I didn't really understand what she meant. Now I do. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. Then he reached up and rammed the jutsu into her sisi. The queen of the Grim barely had time to gasp. Pain. Salem felt her upper torso evaporate in a black mist. What remained of her crashed backward to the floor with a horrible splat. Her curse went to work at once, forcing her to regenerate. To relive the moment of her death as she regrew what had been lost. God's the agony. Even after healing, she still felt it, a dull ache that permeated her very core. It felt like he'd stabbed her in her very soul. Would the pain ever go away? Would it fade? It had to. It must. A blurry shape entered the corner of her mending vision as she lay there, wasted and gasping for air. I was content to talk, her tormentor rumbled. But if you're going to be difficult, threaten everything I know and love well. That changes things. She gasped the word out. Don't do that again. I beg of you, anything but that. Great. Through her regenerating eyes she saw his silhouette sigh. Now I feel like a bully. I didn't come here for this. Came to talk. Are you happy now? She spat at his feet. You've proven your point. We're still at a stalemate, you and I. Not really. You see, happiness isn't in the having. Much to her dismay, Naruto dipped down and picked her up, the fiend pulling her body into his arms as though she were no more than a child. It's in just being. In just saying it. Release me, you oaf. Nope. I'll put you down in a second. Salem kicked out against him to no avail. He lifted her with ease. He started towards one of the few intact pieces of furniture that remained. She lacked the strength to fight him properly, even as he set her down on a torn couch. The very moment he did, she slapped to this tea and move him away with a spellbolt. The noise of consternation he made was music to her ears. Another clone took his place, not missing a beat. Was that really necessary? She glared bloody red daggers at him. It absolutely was. He planted a fist on his hip. Gonna let me finish? A pale hand waved him on. I know how you see yourself, Salem. The lamp was thorough. She watched his brow pinch at some unseen memory. Blasted things stuffed your past in my head. Ozma's too. You're destructive and you're angry and you're broken. She looked away, even as his words stabbed into her. You're a blunt instrument. You think hate and anger drives you. It's all you are. It's not. Her head snapped up. I think I understand you a little more, after seeing what you went through. He plunked down beside her, tucking both knees into his knee. Everything you have ever done has been for love. Still his eyes never left hers. You wanted the gods to resurrect Ozma for love. A hand rose, fingers splayed as he began to count down. You fought them for love. You raged at them for love. You killed Ozma that day for love because you loved your children and didn't want to see them taken away. Baffling man. She couldn't comprehend him. Why tell me this? Aghast, she buried her head in her hands, hiding a brief moment of weakness within her palms. Do you think you can sway me to your side? Convince me? Stuck me? Bitter laughter tumbled forth from her lips. You're too late. 1,000 years too late. I am who I am. I cannot go back. It's never too late to talk. He beamed back. Give it a try. You might surprise yourself. Salem sank to her knees on the couch, wholly spent. I don't understand you, Meh. Most people don't. Doesn't really bother me. That said, Naruto flashed her a fresh, cheery grin all his own and shifted a little closer. His hip brushed hers. I think we both got off on the wrong foot, don't you? We could fight and squabble all day, fight each other to the undeath, or once more, the blonde offered her his hand in good faith, we could just start over. What do you say? Salem eyed his palm like a king taijutsu. Her right hand twitched. Just little. And the world changed. As it did elsewhere. The weapon was nearly complete. Amber could see it in her mind's eye now. She knew the shape she wanted to forge the metal into. She merely needed to bring the rest of it out. It was merely a matter of will. Eyes blazing with flames, she sheathed her limbs in heat and pulled the red-hot metal from the forge. Using her semblance to lighten the weighty load, she took hold of it with a pair of tongs and set the mechanism into a barrel of water to cool. Some might call such techniques crude, outdated even. Not she. Naruto would appreciate this, she knew. He better bloody well be she'd spent the better part of a day and a half working on this masterpiece. Amber leaned back from the forge and admired her craftsmanship. Now that's a fine weapon. A bead of sweat ran down her brow and she wiped it away as she watched the metal cool. It really was the perfect tool for him. Nothing too complicated, but just simple enough to work. It would suit him perfectly. Once she installed the mecha shift function, it would be complete. But that would come later. Naruto would drool over this. Her knees squirmed at the thought. He was a close-quarters fighter at the end of the day. He would always try to get up close and personal with his enemies. It was what defined him, his very way of life. He didn't need a sword to help him, or even a shield to keep him safe. If anything, the latter would make inclined to use the blasted thing, which would in turn make him even more of a target in a fight. Just the thought of it made her shiver. Nope. No fancy mecha shift gun for him. He'd not use it. No, she needed something of a more direct craft. A tool, a weapon he would be able to use with minimal training. She'd labored long into the night with that dire concept in mind. It would be a bit archaic perhaps, maybe even a bit brutish, but sometimes the best tools were the simple ones. And so from that she crafted something extraordinary. She was beginning to understand in other ways too. Others had his eyes just as he did theirs. It wasn't his fault. But blast it all, she would be the first to give him a meaningful gift. Damn it, Winter admired herself in the mirror. She twirled once, twice, then thrice just to be sure. She nodded to herself after a moment. This will do. This would be date unlike any other. She would see to that herself. Raven couldn't deny it any longer. She wanted to, she wished she could, make no mistake. She simply couldn't. Her mood swings, strange cravings, and blasted morning sickness had driven the point home like any blade. The gods were laughing at her, she just knew it. Karma had come to collect its debt and she was overdue for decades of it. Now it was time to pay her dues the universe was keen to collect. And she had no one to blame but herself. She was the one to kidnap him, the one to stuck him, only to be seduced herself. This was her fault, and also his demean her for a fool and demean him for f-king her sideways. She wasn't ready to be a mother again. But she didn't have a choice. Unbidden, her hand strayed to her stomach. Such a little thing. Would she leave this one behind? As she'd left Yang? Would she let her new son or daughter languish in misery as she had? She already knew her answer. She was making amends for her mistakes. Come hell or high water, she would raise this one with care. But first she was going to have words with the man who knocked her up thus. She did what any sensible woman would do. She was going to hunt that boy down like a stag. You look like Cinder. There was not so distant time when Roman Torchwick wouldn't dare utter those words aloud. Not face to face and certainly no through a scroll call. A time when he had feared Cinder fall so much that he would not dare to speak ill of her, even in the privacy of his home. But now? Why, he just couldn't help himself. You see, Roman was having a good day. A very, very good day indeed. Such a good day, in fact, that he was beginning to feel a bit rebellious. Mocking the once mighty Cinder fall? Well, that was just icing on the cake. He knew she couldn't harm him now, not without risking her own interest in Vale. More than that, she was nowhere near him. Any retribution she attempted to visit upon him, well. Vacuo was a long way from Vale, wasn't it? Whatever was she doing over there? He had a suspicion of his own. A low growl rang through the scroll, little more than a whispery rasp, a shadow of its former self. Do not test me, Torchwick. Don't test her? How all the testing? He'd seen her face. It had only been for a moment before she'd covered the scroll's camera, but it was enough. She'd gotten sloppy. The once fiery femme fatale was little more than a shell of her former self now, scarred and ruined after not one but two ignominious defeats. First in Vale, and then again in Atlas at the hands of the former Winter Maiden. Freya hadn't gone quietly into that good night. Listening to her now, his grin gained an edge. Ooh, you don't sound too good there, boss. Might want to take a cough drop. Roman, the scroll in his hand, trembled with rage. One more word and I will end you, Suyer, you will. Quaking in my boots here, Cindy. An unintelligible snarl answered. Right. Best not push her too far. Don't worry about the dust. He talked over her before her rant could truly take off. We're a bit behind schedule. Due in no small part to the arrival of Bloody Winter Schnee and her forces. Besides, I'll handle it. And he would. But his way, not hers, and she'd have to deal with the fallout. Don't worry your pretty little head. See that you do. She rasped. Once I've recovered, I will return to Vale. To see you in person. One last jab. Enjoy the desert, boss. And try not to get burned again. Alright, an angry crunch heralded the end of her call. Hook, line, and sinker. Fetching a cigar from his jacket, he flicked it to life and leaned back in his chair to savor his victory. Was it wrong that he took some perverse pleasure in her suffering? Maybe so. She'd certainly made him and Neo suffer before that blonde bumbled along. Bloody worth it that, once upon a time, she would have massacred him for daring to talk back. Or sent her kids after him at the very least. But she didn't, and she couldn't. You see, Cinder needed him now. He was her eyes and ears here in Vale, and unlike her, not suicidal enough to cross blades with a maiden. Oh yes, he knew Fall's dirty little secret neo-subterfuge in Beacon had paid dividends on that front. Cinder had lost to only a single maiden with backup. No way in hell was she getting past 3, not when those 3 were aligned with Vale. Somehow, he doubted she even knew the Schnee was one. Best keep that little secret to himself. Psychopaths got funny ideas in their heads when they were offered power on a silver platter. And there was still one more to be had. Summer. Whoever had the power of the 4th maiden, well, that was a fine bargaining chip there. They could change the game. For now, the plan continued. But it would be his plan from here on out. Done his way. Not hers. No, sir, there were far bigger players out there now, bigger than little O.L. Cinderfall. Neo was well on her way to turning one of them even now, and it was time to bargain. Vernal ate dirt. Her body struck the ground with aplomb and bounced once, twice, then thrice. Each time her face met the ground, mud shot up her nose, leaving her retching. Finally, momentum took pity upon the poor girl's body and left her sullen form skidding away in defeat. Her face burned with shame as she thumped a fist against the ground. Well, a familiar voice sighed. That's another lose for you. No fair, why are you so strong? Push-ups, sit-ups, and plenty of juice. Naruto gazed back at her serenely. Care to try again? I'm sure Neo's got a few more tricks she could demonstrate. Beside him, the little Helen unfurled her parasol and sketched a deep, sweeping bow. Vernal hacked and coughed into the much, then flung herself up with a snarl. Again her mentor quirked an eyebrow. You sure? We've been at this for hours. You're gonna break. She growled. Alright, have it your own way. The blonde shrugged. Neo, 2 or 3 more. The petite mute tilted head as if to repeat the question. Yup. 2 or 3 more. She smiled. It was not a pleasant smile. Vernal barely saw her move. By some miracle she managed to get her hooked blades up in time, but even then it was only just. The second broke her guard. The third forced her weapons up and out of her hands, then sent her sprawling much as before. The little mute planted a heel on her back and walked right over her, just as she had before. Look, Naruto sighed. I keep telling you, don't just guard. You have to take a risk once in a while. Vernal growled into the dirt, but didn't complain. She did not dare. As far as training went, this might seem ruthless, if only because she demanded that they be. She needed ruthless. She needed aggression, to be pressured as she had never been before. She had to unlock her semblance. She wanted to be useful. She needed to prove her worth. Everyone was off training, growing ever stronger, widening the gap. Blasted maidens. It wasn't fair. Raven, she could understand the former chief could thrash her arse with both hands tied behind her back. Probably a leg too. Amber had held her power for years. Only made sense that she was strong, and growing stronger still. By contrast, the stupid Schnee was new to her powers and thus weaker for it, but she was training every day. Soon enough she'd close the gap with her sister maidens. And she would be left even further in the dust than before. Even Jin was faring better than her. She'd unlocked both her semblance and aura in one day, to say nothing of that blasted bloody mute. What was she compared to that? Neo was playing with her. Naruto could make mincemeat of them both. So what did that make her? Weakling. Weaker than all of them. No, she refused. She wouldn't be left behind. Not after she'd come this far. She was meant for more than this. She had a destiny. With the last of her strength, she pushed herself up with trembling limbs. I need to be stronger, Naruto sighed. All right. Run it back. Vernal granted him a flimsy grin as she retrieved her weapons. Once more, she surpassed her limits and climbed up on shaky knees. Naruto waited for her. Then he waded in, rolling his shoulder. Her weapons snapped up to meet him. Blue eyes burned gold in response, and there was not so much as an iota of mercy in them. Good mercy made men weak. She wanted to be strong, even if it meant a few bruises and broken bones along the way. He was her teacher. She had to make him proud. She'd show him she was worth something. Vernal would show them all. Amber sprawled on the couch with a pleased sigh. See, now this is Nicaea, she gasped, but a little as firm fingers massaged her aching legs. Right there. That's the spot. Her back arched. Harder. Don't stop. To his credit, Naruto's shadow clone didn't bat an eyelash. He merely chuckled and went about his work. Do you realize that you sound absolutely filthy right now? See, a lazy swipe missed his head by a wide margin. I've been on my feet for so long. Her voice warbled as he found a particularly nasty knot and went to work on it. Do you have any idea how strong it was to get the mechanism right on your weapon? Right there. Her cries became a keening whine as his fingers traced the line of her inner thigh. That's the spot, he hummed and went to work. So is that weapon of yours ready yet? Maybe. Flaming golden eyes regarded him with thinly veiled intent. That's a secret. Now, higher. A blonde brow rose. Oi. This is a massage. Keep your kinks out of this. Never. She dove forward and kissed him with a laugh. This was the life. Because she was alive. She, the girl who had been meant to die, little more than a footnote in history, was living her new life to the fullest. Her enemies were defeated, and those that weren't were left to scuttle about in the dark like the roaches they were. It brought her no end of pleasure. Speaking of which, her lips parted in a gasp as strong arms settled around her waist, lifting her with ease, pulling her into his lap. Strong hands settled against his seat and pushed, nudging him back to the cushions. Clone or not, Naruto's doppelgangers were every bit as impressive as the original when it came to matters like this. Still, did she have the distinct feeling she was forgetting something? Vaguely, she recalled the original mentioning he had something important to do, hence the clone he'd sent to visit her workshop. Meh, probably wasn't anything important. Right? Wait, wasn't today the day that Winchiro, He was doing that thing with his tongue again. Warm lips found hers once more and she stopped thinking such thoughts. Her eyes flashed with fresh flame as she tilted her head back. Mine Uptown Vale wasn't really the place one considered for a date. It was certainly posh enough, make no mistake, but Naruto felt it lacked a certain element that made it feel human. From what little he could see of it through a window at any rate. Tall buildings loomed on either side of him in the late afternoon. Light little more than blurs that he watched them go by. Cars really weren't all that bad in retrospect. Certainly not when he was the one being driven about like royalty, you know. I could get used to this, don't. He leaned back and tried not to sigh at Kurama's jab. I'd prefer not to make a habit of it just like that. The time had come nearly before he knew it, and he found himself face to face with his destiny. But was it really destiny if he chose to grab it by the horns and meet it? He tried to tell himself as much, but it did precious little to stop his hands from twitching in his lap. Anxiety roiled in his stomach like a storm of nervous butterflies, threatening to burst free at any moment. This was just a simple date. Just an outing to satisfy Winter's request. One and done. Testing the waters, they were. It didn't have to mean anything. Certainly not. So why had she sent a limo to pick him up? Not for the first time. He was glad Amber was still downtown working on his weapon. She'd have an absolute fit if she saw him gawping like this. The rest of Team 7 certainly would have. The thought brought a pang of melancholy stabbing through his thoughts, and he shook it off quickly. All told, the limousine itself was larger on the inside than without, room enough for him to kick his legs back and more besides. More wine? Sat across from him, Winter offered him another glass. Naruto sighed. I don't think that's a good idea. Nonsense. She smiled. Live a little. But he offered her his glass and she poured with discreet care. Dark red liquid bubbled up. After a moment's hesitation he knocked it back, further fortifying himself with liquid courage. That was the 5th glass he'd had hence, and they still hadn't reached their destination. Anyone else would have been drunk by now. He barely felt tipsy. What could he say? He liked sweet things. Even when they were cold. And right now, Winter looked good. Really good. Better than him considering he was clad in his usual outfit. She was wearing something else altogether. Clad in a sinful snow-white gown that hugged her curves, hinting at what lay beneath without being too overt, she was every bit a beauty. Her dress hugged her curves and was cut low, yet not so low as to be considered crass, merely hinting at the warmth beneath. Hers was an icy elegance, distant and refined at a glance. Up close it thawed. She cleaned up well out of uniform. A far cry from the stern officer he had once squabbled with. She moved with pose and purpose alike. There was an restless sway to her hips, unable to quite stay still. On and on they went, trading small talk as the care weaved its way through the madness of the evening. How do I look? She preened a little when she caught him staring for what must have been the umpteenth time. Is it too much? Naruto's looked away with a cough. No, it's fine, definitely too much. Winter relented with a sigh and, much to his chagrin, tilted the entire bottle back to her lips. Blast it all. She drank once and set it within the ice once more. I wanted tonight to be perfect, yet here I am making a fool of myself. He touched a hand to hers. We're not perfect. We really aren't. She handed him the bottle, and he drank in turn. Tell me, what would you prefer to do? I can cancel our reservation if you wish. Naruto fought down a flinch. You don't have to. I feel that I should, if only to salvage what remains of my dignity. Weren't showing much of that earlier. Her face turned red. That's no, do you re-enjoying this, aren't you? His lips pursed, trying to hiding a smile. No, perished the thought. Naruto, his laughter died as something hit the roof of their car. Blue eyes snapped up, widened as a crimson blade sliced clean through. Winter fumbled for her weapon, but the wine had dulled her reactions by a hair. As such, she wasn't quite quick enough when all hell broke loose. Someone ripped the shielded plating away. Light spilled through. So too did a familiar visage, red eyes narrow with wrath. Raven growled. A word. His brow furrowed. Now's not as she yanked him through. It would have been the simplest thing to break Raven's grip. Naruto even considered it as she tossed him into the street. An ironclad sense of self-restraint held him back. Instead he hit asphalt on bended knee, sprang back up, and promptly found himself face to face with an angry maiden. Her forehead smashed against his, earning an irritated grunt. You did this to me. Naruto quirked a brow at her. What did I do? Omen tickled his throat. He didn't bat an eyelash. Didn't even twitch. Raven glowered, face a fierce shade of embarrassed red. Don't make me say it. You know damn well what you did. She grabbed his hand and slapped it against her stomach. Kurama guffawed. You've got to be kidding. Take responsibility, blast you. Raven howled. There was a silence. And then, Naruto bolted. Nope, get back here.
Okay, sadly the chapter is over. And if you enjoyed, just leave a like and subscribe with post notification, so when the next chapter is ready, you will be notified. Okay, see you in the next video. Bye.